If you've been following the scenes coming out of Afghanistan, you can see that it's Saigon all over again, and maybe even worse. And I realize for some young people, a name like Saigon, the helicopter airlift, the U.S. humiliation in Vietnam, all seems like ancient history. But for those of us who lived through it, now I came to America shortly after all this, but these images were seared in my mind, and we're seeing it play out again. Now, here's a scene, just a brief glimpse of the scene at Kabul airport, and it is total chaos. Listen. You have a hasty airlift, literally people falling off the plane to their deaths, and all of this suggesting the humiliation of the superpower of America. The Biden people seem to be in hiding. They literally have put up a kind of auto response if journalists contact the White House saying, "We're on vacation. Well, we can't be reached. Call some other guy." That's Jen Psaki's email. So this is all very creepy, and I think it has long-term implications because what it means is that not only do we see a 11th century group of primitives return to power in Afghanistan, not only will we see China start to move in, build its proposed railroad all the way from China through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, but U.S. allies around the world are going to feel like, well, we can't really count on the United States. Think of how the Taiwanese are feeling right about now, a small country that is unable on its own to defend against China. Think how the Chinese appetite for aggression is already going up. So all of this is the ruinous long-term implication of what we're seeing in front of our eyes. Now, one question I want to ask is how is it possible that when the United States spent $88 billion, so close to $100 billion, to train this Afghan army, we've been doing it for 20 years. How is it possible that when you put the Afghan army into the field, it basically gets up and runs away? The Taliban have taken over the country at lightning speed. First Herat, then Kandahar, and now basically Kabul. This is it. It's kind of over. Now, as late as July, Biden said, quote, overrunning everything was, quote, highly unlikely. Biden also said that the Afghan security forces have the capacity to, quote, sufficiently fight and defend the country. So how is it that Biden could be so inept, get things so disastrously wrong? And now the left, looking at what's happening, these horrific images, are trying to immediately shift blame onto Trump. And what they're saying is, wait a minute, wasn't it Trump who talked about withdrawing? Wasn't Trump saying we don't need any more wars? Biden was only continuing Trump's policy. So this is the predictable and shameful attempt to avoid taking responsibility, which is what people do when they are in a very bad situation. But we have to make a distinction here, a distinction between was the Afghan war a good idea and should America withdraw? That is a whole separate question from how the withdrawal was organized, planned, and orchestrated. You can tell with the Biden people there was really no planning at all. In fact, apparently the U.S. commander at Bagram Air Force Base woke up in the morning and the U.S. was gone, absolutely out of there. And he didn't even know about it. So this is all suggestive of the kind of incompetence that we see. We saw it with Jimmy Carter with the hostage crisis. We saw it with Clinton in his refusal to get bin Laden. But let's focus in a little bit on the Afghan army here a little bit, because there's a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal by Yaroslav Tromifov. It's called How the Taliban Overran the Afghan Army. And I want to read a couple sentences because they're very telling. The Afghan army fighting alongside American troops was molded to match the way the Americans operate. The U.S. military, the world's most advanced, relies heavily on combining ground operations with air power, using aircraft to resupply outposts, strike targets, ferry the wounded, and collect reconnaissance and intelligence. Now, what's he saying? What he's basically saying is that we never trained the Afghan army to fight independently as an army. Instead, what happened is, operating out of the Bagram Air Force Base with U.S. coordination, U.S. decision-making, the Afghan soldiers were integrated into U.S. operations. So it's like, hey guys, go fight the Taliban. By the way, if you get any trouble, make a phone call. We'll send some air cover. We'll blow those guys to smithereens. So this coordinated American military approach, the Afghans came to rely on. They never could fight on their own. They were never trained to fight on their own. Their whole thing was help, 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 come in America. And so America would show up, bombard those guys. So it wasn't even a fair fight on the ground. It was the incompetent Afghans supported by U.S. air power against the Taliban. And even then the Taliban were holding their own. So the moment the United States picked up, and I want to pick up the article again, in the wake of Biden's decision to withdraw, the U.S. pulled its air support, intelligence, and contractors servicing Afghan planes and helicopters. That meant the Afghan military simply couldn't operate anymore. So they gave up. They ran away. And that was the end of it all. Now, the worst thing about all this is all reminiscent of what happened in Vietnam. In other words, it's not just that the United States didn't learn from other people's mistakes. Let's remember the British were once in Afghanistan and they were pushed out. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. It was pushed out. So one might say the United States was sort of short-sighted and not taking a page or learning from the experience of other countries. But the problem is worse. The Biden administration didn't learn from our own experience in Vietnam. There, too, we had propped up a South Vietnamese army that was reliant on U.S. support, U.S. coordination. So the moment the United States began to pull back, the South Vietnamese army essentially collapsed. Now, here's a photo. I want you to take a look at it. Very interesting photo. I'm going to hold it up. It shows a bunch of Taliban guys in the presidential palace in Kabul, which basically means the country has fallen. Taliban spokesman said the Afghan war is over, and I think he's basically right. Now, what's amusing about this photograph, Debbie pointed this out to me, I think it's very interesting. If you look closely at the photo itself, you see a bunch of guys in kind of 11th century outfits. And behind them is a painting, which is obviously a very old painting of some sort of Muslim scholars, maybe a Muslim teacher instructing an audience. And those guys are in 11th century outfits. So very clearly you can see that the Taliban is essentially trying to keep the country in the 11th century. They simply don't accept our definition of progress. Things are getting better. No, for them, there's no progress. Things were actually at their peak in the 7th century when Muhammad lived, and that's the world that they want to recreate. Now, while all of this is going on, and this is what makes the whole thing really sick, the Biden administration, far from dealing with the situation, was making videos of a obviously gay intern in Jen Psaki's office, prancing around the West Wing, taking selfies, showing himself giggling and smiling. And to me, the message that's conveyed, at least in retrospect, is, you know what? We might have gotten our butts kicked, but we got our butts kicked really in style. We know how to lose. So this is the disgrace. It's one thing to lose. It's another thing to lose and laugh. And what we're seeing here is basically what you get when you put Democrats in charge. You get the world on fire. You get America seriously jeopardizing its own position in the world. I'm not even sure you can say anymore that America is the world's superpower. But what I will say is that with this kind of leadership, we don't deserve to be.